What a massive noggin! I mean, look at this guy. What gives? What could have possibly inspired this? And what's the deal with his steeds? Are they the body and soul of a single fell Galarian Rapidash, fell to the cold in the frozen tundra, its corpse freezing solid and its spirit released to roam free? Or are they better than that and pull from real folklore and the mythology of the region they are based in, and are also some of the most deeply inspired Pokemon? Well, let's go ahead and look into this steedy love triangle in this episode of Massive Noggin. Hello, do you like wood? Would you believe that I do? Well, if you're looking for a stud, well, I've got your answer. You know, I used to use just wood shavings and my axe to shave my body hair. Ah, the exfoliation! But when I became a true man, I realized I need to take care of my skin and stop scratching my body up with wood. That's why I use the Lawnmower 4.0 Body Hair Trimmer by Manscaped, today's sponsor. Look at all these shavings. These shavings are a metaphor for how hairless I am. Thanks to today's sponsor, Manscaped. It's got a safety light just like my favorite tools. And you want to know what's new? The Ultra Premium Body Wash scented with refined cologne and infused with aloe vera and sea salt for a luxurious head-to-toe lather and tough cleaning. The Manscaped Peak Hygiene Plan is perfect for getting all this sawdust and sweat off me. And save a load with my coupon code Lockstin20 to get 20% off your order and free shipping. The link will be in the description. Now then, so first things first, let's talk about our posse boy, Calyrex. So, we know the more eastern inspirations for Calyrex. We covered them here. Rabbit banished to the moon, a symbol of immortality in Chinese alchemy, and also, he's partially based on the Holy Grail as well, maybe, possibly. The Holy Grail is from the King Arthur mythos, and it's also said to be able to grant immortality, so it all links up good. But it turns out, there's more. Like Grimmsnarl.
Trolls exist! They steal your socks?
Calyrex also has some Fae inspirations. His main Fae inspiration appears to be from Oberon. So who or what is an Oberon? Glad you asked. Oberon is the king of the fairies in medieval and Renaissance age European literature, of course. King Oberon, for one, has the same fascination with the moon, so much so that William Herschel in 1787, upon discovering a new moon in the solar system, one of Uranus's, he named it after King Oberon. But now, arguably the most well-known instance of Oberon is from Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream. Shakespeare, of course, being one of the most quintessentially British things around. And if you know anything about Galar, then you know that every Pokemon there is British. Now, Oberon himself has an interesting origin. For one, he's the son of Julius Caesar and Morgan Le Fay, a powerful enchantress related to King Arthur and the Lady of the Secret Isle. You know who Caesar is, but the Secret Isle refers to Avalon and is one of the islands that inspired the Isle of Armor. But in the King Arthur mythos, this is where Arthur was healed after a battle, and in some versions of the story, is given immortality. There we go again with immortality, Calyrex! But now Avalon has a lot that we could talk about and keep going, but this video is already covering a lot, so let's move on. At one point in early life, Oberon was cursed, which caused him to stop growing once he was 3 years old. But later on, the fairy that cursed him felt bad about it and gave him beauty and clairvoyance, future-seeing, psychic ability. So how perfect! Oberon can now travel anywhere he wants simply by wishing, and he can easily tame any animal. Just like how Calyrex tamed those two wildly destructive steeds. He can make castles shrink and grow, he can't age, and if he dies, he goes to paradise with a get-out-of-hell-free card. Oberon also walks around the woods and speaks to whomever he sees, but if you talk to him, you are lost forever. And if you don't talk to him and ignore him, you get targeted by hundreds of storms. What a lad. Being king of the fairies, he of course wears a crown, and often it's a crown depicting antlers, which fits in well with the deer Wopeltinger origins we talked about in the last Calyrex video. And also, Oberon is most often depicted wearing green and white. Often that green is clothing made of leaves, as most fairies utilize and have power over plants. So now, all we have to do is add in the big, puffy English crown elements, and you get Calyrex's massive noggin. Now, there's one more source of inspiration that I can see with Calyrex, and that's Herne the Hunter of English folklore, a ghost or fae of sorts that would ride around on a ghostly mount in the winter. While the tale was vocally passed down for who knows how long, the earliest written account of Herne comes from 1597, a Shakespeare play, The Merry Wives of Windsor. In this play, Herne is the ghost of a Windsor forest keeper, and here's a few lines from the play describing him. "There is an old tale that goes, that Herne the Hunter, sometimes a keeper here in Windsor forest, doth all the winter time, at still midnight, walk around about an oak with great ragged horns, and there he blasts the tree." Where all of this starts to come together is with the folklore motif known as the Wild Hunt, common in tales from all across Northern Europe. Usually, a mythological figure leads a soul raving while on the back of a horse or stag. The hunters who follow are usually the souls of the dead, or Valkyries, or fairies and elves. Names you'd recognize out of those who have done wild hunts include Odin, King Arthur, Finn McCool, who we talked about in the Grimmsnarl video, King Oberon, Old Nick, one of the many names for the devil in the Bible, and, of course, Herne the Hunter. And since most of these wild hunts happen on winter nights, on ghostly steeds, there's the possible references for the two horses. Now, small tangent, because if I don't mention it, someone down below will. Many could interpret the four horsemen of the apocalypse's actions as being another example of a wild hunt. I mean, a soul raving on ghostly horses? Yeah. And these four horses are described as black, red, white, and pale, which lines up fairly decently when you look at these two horse Pokemon and their shiny colors. But speaking of them, let's talk about those horses. Could they have been a Galarian Rapidash originally, and the cold in the Crown Tundra was too intense, so it passed out and died, leaving behind a frozen corpse and a ghostly soul? That would mean the Ice-type one is dead too, making it perfectly fitting of the Wild Hunt motif. Well, that is one theory, but let's look at mythology and folklore some more. And quick reminder, Norse mythology influences Britain's folklore a lot due to their historical interactions. It's also the reason why Galar is home to Berserker and Runa Regis. Anyway, in Norse myth, Odin, who also did those wild hunts, remember, has an 8-legged horse named Sleipnir. 8 divided by 2 is 4, and notably, both Glastrier and Spectrier have one eye covered. The opposite eyes of each other, in fact. 2 divided by 2 is 1. Also, Odin famously is one-eyed as well. Odin is involved with Ragnarok, which shares many parallels to the biblical Armageddon as well, where those 4 horsemen are found. Oh, I love when things all come together like that. But let's get back to the Celts. Let's talk about Epona. No, not that Epona. This Epona. There you go. She's the Celtic goddess of horses, one of the most important gods in the ancient world. She was so important that the Romans even adopted her. And on top of being the goddess of horses, she is also a goddess of fertility and is often depicted with ears of grain, which is fitting for Calyrex, who is also known as the King of Bountiful Harvest. Epona was also a psychopomp, meaning a spirit or deity that guides the souls of the dead to the afterlife. You could say that she hunts for them on soul-raving missions like the Wild Hunt. Epona had a lot of followers, but some of the people that cared about her the most were kings. These guys relied on horses in so many ways. Transport, messaging, war, mills, labor. Just so much of life in the Middle Ages is wholly dependent on them. And kings were devout to Epona because, well, if you piss off a god like Osiris or Hades, that's your life. Or one aspect of your empire that's in trouble now. But if you piss off Epona, you get pissed off horses, and your empire gets stopped in its tracks. And that's why Calyrex and these Pokemon are so close. and important. Also, Epona is most commonly depicted with 2 horses behind her. She was all about horse breeding as a fertility goddess after all. So not only do we have 2 Epona horse Pokemon here, but also one is a more masculine war horse and the other a more feminine Barbie horse.
With cursed witch powers!
But stepping away from their design a bit, let's look into the actions in the Crown Tundra. The plot is pretty simple. The horses are tormenting the people of the Crown Tundra, and so you help Calyrex, the king, get the reins of unity, which are woven partially from the hairs of the mane of one of the horses. And with this, Calyrex is able to once again ride its loyal steed, as he is the only one able to do so. Now, compare this to the Celtic tale of High King Brian Boru of Ireland, the only person capable of riding on the back of a puka, which is a fairy that takes the form of a black horse and goes around tormenting Christians. Only after crafting a special bridle that contained 3 hairs from the puka's tail was the king able to mount and tame it. That's the same story, but like mad-libbed. Well, since that horse was black, let's look a bit more specifically at Spectrier now. Its name is easy. The part it shares with Glastrier is the Strier, which refers to the Destrier, a medieval war horse, which, while the largest of horses from the time period, would be considered small by modern standards. They were highly prized by knights and kings riding into battle. And the Spect, then, is simply from Spectre, a type of ghost. The ghost typing is obvious, what with the ghostly steeds in the wild hunts and all, but it could also refer to sleep demons. After all, there's wordplay here. A mare is a female horse, but a mare is also a demon that would visit you in the night, causing things like nightmares, hence the word nightmare. Or they would visit you and do incubus, succubus deeds, absorbing your life energy. Notably, one of Spectrier's dex entries mentions this. As it dashes through the night, Spectrier absorbs the life force of sleeping creatures. And notably, Game Freak also likes making the more animal-esque ghost-type Pokemon based on extinct animals. See Decidueye and Dragapult. And conveniently, there is the Old English Black, a now extinct breed of horse famous for its black coloration and its distinct feathering. Feathering being the long hair right above a horse's hooves. How perfect! And speaking of Spectrier's hooves, one of my favorite details is that her hooves are backwards, which is exactly what we see with Kelpies, mythological water horses that live in the streams and rivers of Scotland, and are most commonly depicted as black. It's so perfect! It's exactly right! I love it! Ugh. It's really cool. I kind of just wish that this level of detail would be used for something that isn't a horse though, you know? It's also worth noting that King Arthur himself owns a mare, one named Lomre, further linking Arthur to Calyrex. But Calyrex's other steed is Glastrier, whose unique part of the name comes from glacier, as well as Glastian, a water horse goblin from Manx folklore. The Manx being the people who lived on the Isle of Man, which eventually would become a part of Scotland and later became a self-governing dependency of the British Crown. Being a water horse means it pairs even better with Spectrier, the Kelpie, and similarly, Glastian lures people onto its back and then will drown the people, because that's what it does. That's what these horses do. They're fake. They're fun. It's a funny prank. Haha, you're dead. But don't worry, because if you're ever grabbed, simply light a fire. Glastian is deathly afraid of fire, which could be reflected by Glastier's fire weakness being ice type and all. Another water horse that may be involved is Njikr from Faroese and Icelandic folklore, as it's stark white and is said to neigh eerily like the ice cracking on frozen lakes, perhaps referencing Glastrier's chilling neigh ability. And we can't talk about Scotland and Glastrier without mentioning the unicorn. It's Scotland's national animal, and they are most often depicted as white, and Glastrier has the big icicle in place of a unicorn horn, and similar enough to the puka mentioned before, it is said that only those pure of heart can tame the extremely wild unicorn. Similar again to Calyrex being the only one able to tame Glastrier. You're just so special, aren't you? So there's a lot of folklore behind these horse designs, and I love how rather than just referencing one each, they each pull from many, and thus have an overall magical folklore horses vibe to them. And perhaps then, being black and white, they can resemble the two knight pieces in chess, Calyrex then being the king. Chess was invented in India around the 7th century, but of course would evolve over the centuries, and what we know of as chess today came about in medieval Europe, primarily France, and of course, England. And perhaps all of this then is inspired by Western constellations. I mean, we have this group of them right here. Lepus the hare, who borders the giant Orion the hunter. Remember, Calyrex and the wild hunt and all that. Also, Orion was a giant, huge people. That's why they're called giants. And there's the whole Dynamax thing and all that. But then, right around them is the spooky and spectral Horsehead Nebula, as well as Monoceros the unicorn, who's flanked on both sides by Canis Major and Canis Minor. And who else would they be next to fight if not the Hydra constellation, which happens to be the largest of the Western constellations, similar to Eternatus being the largest of all Pokemon. And plus, each of the fingers on Eternamax Eternatus end in little Hydra heads. And that Hydra is said to have poisonous blood and poisonous breath. Perhaps Orion here, who happens to wield a sword and a shield, is the hero that we see depicted in statues and murals in Pokemon Sword and Shield, though we later learn that the reality is that it was the hero duo, and perhaps also maybe Calyrex and Steeds. It's so cool. It's just so cool. But you know, that's too good. It's too perfect that all of the legendaries in Sword and Shield are from this one group of constellations, except this group of constellations is also right next to Gemini, you know, the identical twins. And you know, in Chinese astronomy, the Gemini constellation lies across the border between two quadrants, one of them being the quadrant of the tiger. Tiger style would for sure match, and the other of the vermilion bird. Crane and 7-star mantis style. What a massive noggin!